Hey Brian, how are you?
Good. How's it going, Mike?
Good, good. Thanks for doing this. You're well known in the handball community, but I think people just know you as the guy who gets the 2 minutes and the red cards.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's this will be a very important podcast talking about what you do, and I'll let you explain that. So first of all, if you can just give us a little bit of your background in handball and what you do for work now.
Yeah, sure. So started playing handball in junior high. Started with the league in Edmonton and then the provincial teams with the juvies and juniors and seniors. Um, yeah, and then also was involved in coaching at SPA. And yeah, so played a bunch of different roles in the handball world in Alberta and had a great time doing all of them. And I've also worked as a physio trainer with the men's team over the last couple of years, not this year, but yeah. So, and my clinic is called Innovation Physical Therapy in Mayo. So I'm on the north side here in Edmonton, but treat a whole wide variety of patients in terms of recreational athletes, high level athletes, people in motor vehicle accidents, work injuries. Yeah. So, um, yeah, and definitely have an interest in handball related injuries because I've played and loved the sport and still continue to play. So, hopefully we can help lots of the athletes and looking at the risk factors and returning back to sport after a layoff of this length. Also, and I saw your previous podcast too, um, identifying some of those other risk factors that may not be purely physical in terms of mental stress and fatigue, anxiety, lack of sleep, all that stuff plays a picture in terms of physical injury as well. So
So a big thing is like our clubs leagues are starting up here in the next week. Provincial teams are starting up next week, but a lot of the athletes haven't done much in the last 6 months. My big worry is, the players getting pushed too quickly, and then
mm,
injuries happening. As you look at professional sports right now, there's more injuries than ever, especially in Europe and handball right now. What are some suggestions you have on like the younger athletes or any of the athletes now that are going to come back and start training 2 3 times a week plus a couple games a week? What are some important things that us as coaches and them as players really need to focus on?
yeah, so great question. When you look at the biggest risk factor for any injury, but even handball specific, is an increase in training volume. So there's a good study from the Oslo Sport Trauma Research Center that talks about when you look at an increase of more than 60% of a training volume in a 1 week span compared to the previous 4 weeks, that's when you see an actual significant increase in the risk for injury and specifically shoulder injuries. So it's going to be athlete dependent and athlete specific, but in general, we want to make sure that the athletes are starting with a good base level of strength before they're going into high volume training situations. So coaches need to implement and athletes need to implement some strength training and some good dedicated gym work over the next 6 to 8 weeks, um, with very small increases in handball training, to see good results and to have is to reduce the risk of injury as much as you can over the first couple months of the season.
Okay. Um, Now going in that, like, with the leagues and the younger athletes, what are important things like, even though they're going to start next week and probably going to be going light to start off, but what are some important warm-ups, like especially with shoulder exercises, like, how in handball typically you play a warm-up game, then you warm up your arm, and then you warm up goalies and you shoot. Is there some important things you think that should be added to that for like the shoulder warm-ups so the athletes don't get hurt so quickly with their
Yeah,
shoulders?
for sure. And I'll just share my screen with you, Mike, because there's a
Okay.
research
I
study
might
that I
have
have.
to,
Oh,
I'll
you
just
have to
put
let
share
me yet?
screen. Yeah, now you can do it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so that same kind of group I was talking about, the Oslo research group, they did a
Yeah.
good study. You can see the same, Mike?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They did a good study on incorporating like specific drills for warm up for handball specific.
Okay.
Um, so you can see the ones right on the top here. The first exercise at the top is called a sleeper stretch. So the goal of this one is to try and increase the internal rotation range of motion for the athlete, which the cuff um, is susceptible to more injuries in handball is because of the action that it plays. So your primary muscles when you're throwing a handball, it starts right from your legs with your steps and your position of your hips, and then through the core as you're driving the rotation and flexion through your core. Your pecs and your deltoids are big, powerful shoulder movers, but then the rotator cuff is a group of muscles that basically acts like a pitcher's hand on a baseball, right? And it controls the rotation of the head of the humerus, the top of the arm bone within kind of the cavity of the shoulder itself. So when you're throwing a handball, those rotator cuff muscles go from basically contracting to try and generate the force, and then right after the ball gets left from the hand, then they start to contract to try and break or slow the shoulder down.
Okay.
So we want to, like, when you're training, we want to be training both directions with different levels of speed, but also if you have a lack of range of motion, then that quick movement where it's contracting, relaxing, and then contracting again to break it has to happen over a shorter period of time. So you want to try and take as much load off the rotator cuff as you can. And how you do that is by using the upper back, using the core. So the reason why we're working on some of those is to help that kind of chain of movement happen. So the first one on the top is called a sleeper stretch. So basically it's showing you're laying on your side with your throwing arm and you're just trying to kind of rotate your shoulder inward and push your hand towards the floor. You want to hold that for about 45 seconds to a minute and do about 2 or 3 reps of that.
Okay.
The second exercise is a thoracic mobility one. So you're standing or you're in kind of a 4-point kneel. And with the handball, you're just twisting through your upper back, trying to open your shoulders up as much as you can. And I would repeat that one. I wouldn't hold it as a stretch, but I would do at least 20 or 30 reps both ways with both your throwing arm and then your non-dominant arm.
So is this things that they should just be doing at the practices, or is this something important to do maybe every day at home?
Yeah, it's good. I would do this 3 times a week,
Okay.
especially in the off season.
Yeah.
And then I would just incorporate into your warm-ups in the in season. So
Okay.
for this specific study, they got elite level handball players to do these exercises 3 times a week when they weren't training, and then in season they did it once a week, plus they did it within their session. So anytime they had practice or a game warm-up. So, and it's only a few exercises. It's not crazy. It's easy enough to add into your team warm-up.
Okay.
So the next one, number 3 here, you're starting with a weighted ball or with a handball and going from basically from in front of you and throwing it backwards to your partner behind you catching it.
Okay.
So it's kind of a reversal of what the higher force would be while you're throwing, but it's just trying to work those muscles in the opposite direction, but it's also good for range of motion too. So coming from here and throwing backwards to your partner behind you. Your partner then can throw it over your shoulder, and it's a good exercise to try and grab it and palm it. If you drop it, whatever, the main action of the exercise is to try and basically reverse throw it behind you like that.
Okay.
So I would do same thing. I would aim for about anywhere from 2 to 4 groups of 10 for that one. And then the last one is like a plank and a slider. So this one, they have like a pillow underneath the toes to decrease resistance, but you can use sock feet, or you could use a towel. Most of the kids have a small towel anyways in their bag. But what you're going to do basically is you get into this plank position right here. And then once you're in there, you're going to draw your feet in towards your shoulders. So we're bringing it forward and then back and then repeating. So same thing, I would aim for about 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 10 of that as well.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a good one to include just in the training. But or in the practice session or before a game, but I would incorporate these exercises into what they're doing in the gym 2 to 3 times a week if they weren't doing it enough at practice or in games.
And this is all things for to work really on your range of motion with your shoulder?
Yeah, it's both like it's working. So when you look at the core exercises, um, thoracic mobility or your ability to rotate your upper back is huge in trying to generate
Yeah.
force. Basically, when we're trying to for an optimal shot or pass in handball, you want to start with your legs and driving force through your hips,
Yeah.
and then the force would transfer up the chain to your core or to your back, and then through to your arm, your shoulder, wrist, and fingers, right? So
Okay.
if you can have a wider range of motion and strength in each one of those areas, then you
Yeah.
can generate a bigger force when you're throwing without overloading one specific area. For example, if you have somebody who throws heavy with their shoulder, they don't move their upper back, they don't have a good footwork or good speed into their shot, then they're just gonna they may still throw the handball hard, but they're just using maybe more of their shoulder, and that's when you start to overload your rotator cuff, and that can predispose you to issues
Yeah.
or pain through there.
So like your technical shooting skills, the biomechanics of it is very, very
Exactly.
important in handball.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, you can get away with it, but without proper mechanics, but then usually it comes back to get you in terms of an injury.
Hmm.
And also you're just not reaching your full potential as a player then too. So another thing important for coaches in the early beginnings of the season is to look at that lower level stuff where it's not really high intensity reps, but more technique based,
Yeah.
and try and drill in those movement patterns and those good habits early in the season
Hmm.
for performance, but then also for injury prevention.
Okay. A lot of players, before passing, they do a lot of resistant bands.
Mm-hmm.
They tie the resistant band to a door or the net. Are those really good ones to do as well?
Yeah, you bet. So the, those should be part of their preseason or off-season training, where even if a resistance band gives you enough where you're fatiguing the shoulder within 4 groups of up to 10 to 15 repetitions, great. But if the athlete isn't feeling much fatigue with that, or they're not, if it's too easy, then they should be doing those similar exercises with like a cable set in the gym. So
Okay.
so like you said, you know the ones, and most of the handball players are familiar with them. But if I have the band in my hand going outwards like this,
Yeah.
then pulling across towards your stomach, lifting up in front like that, and then out at like a 45-degree angle or straight out to the side.
Hmm.
Those are definitely, like I said, definitely important to use like your rubber band or your therotubing to dynamically warm up before a training session or before a game like that. Um, and that's definitely more advantageous to do that versus like um, prolonged stretching where you see kids just holding stretches,
Yeah.
and that goes out throughout the body. So what you want to do, and most teams and a lot of sports have moved away from like that static stretching before competition. You can do static stretching um, after a game or during the week or whatever, but I wouldn't do it before a practice or before a match, just
Okay.
because it decreases the potential for fast power generation. So you can be strong, but what makes you better at throwing, passing, moving is your power, right? How much force you can generate over a quick amount of time. So if you do a lot of static stretching where you're holding a hamstring stretch or holding a shoulder stretch, then it's almost like you decrease the elasticity of your muscle. You want that muscle to stretch and then contract quickly, right? So
So you do these, you have your practice, your game. What should be the cool down with your, should you be doing certain exercises or how should you take care of your shoulder after a match or a practice?
yeah, so a good cool down, you should do some light like range of motion drills or light activity after a session. So even just walking on the gym, but just rolling your shoulders or grabbing a ball and just moving through those different ranges of motion.
Okay.
Um, at that point, if you do have an area, say a muscle that's tight, or a certain movement that feels restricted, then you can do some of that passive stretching like we talked about, where you're just holding a certain stretch for 45 seconds to a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Ice is a good way to manage symptoms. It can also manage any kind of acute inflammation that happens during the game. So if you have an area, you don't have to ice everything, and if you hate it, you don't have to do it. But if you do have some soreness, ice is a good way to try and manage some of the symptoms and a little bit of inflammation after a match, if it's there too. So, but just generally, the worst thing you can do is after like a tough match, go and then sit on the couch for 2 hours after your game, or if you're in a tournament, the same thing. So try and still keep moving. It's good to have some good rest time, but after the game or after a training session, try not to be immobile right after. That's when some of the stiffness sets in.
Okay. A couple things. One of our very high-level athletes, I was playing Bundesliga last year, and I had a little bit of a debate with their coach. So she was doing a lot of drills, but not with the ball. They were working like on her technique, but throwing like they had a penny in her hand,
Mm-hmm.
and she was whipping like throwing like the motions of a shooting, and just like over and over and over again. Is
Yeah.
there is it important that what you have in your hand, like weight wise, does it make a difference?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it depends on what your goal is with the training session and how you're training, but I would want to vary it. So I wouldn't do just strictly that type of training. You need the weight and the resistance of the handball to increase your strength, and you want to train sport specific, right? Like you want to train as close as you can to what you're actually doing or what you're expecting your body to do. If you had an athlete with maybe a shoulder injury and they couldn't tolerate the resistance and the weight of the handball was just too much, sure, I would incorporate some same arm movements with a ball, but or without a ball, maybe with a penny, like you said. But
Yeah.
what that does is like it kind of messes up your proprioception or your body's ability to know where your shoulder is in space and to generate those forces. If you don't have a ball in your hand, you may be able to swing your arm faster. You might get into some different ranges of motion, but it's not really sport specific. So
Okay.
it's okay. I wouldn't train a large majority of my sessions like that though, unless there was maybe some subacromial shoulder pain that was developing and you wanted to try and deload the shoulder, but still be able to train at a high level and still incorporate all the other stuff that you need to do to play handball, then that's fine for sure. But it would be kind of more on like an athlete specific basis. I wouldn't routinely do that.
And is there a study at all? I don't know if with this study about like the amount of shots in a practice, like is there like a suggestion of how many shots an athlete should take before it becomes kind of overuse, or is that kind of just per person?
That's a good question, Mike. I haven't seen any research, but I haven't honestly looked that hard for um, actual shots per practice or shots per session.
Yeah.
The research that I've looked at, it labels handball activity as either like training, like a practice, or a game situation. So
Okay.
I'm sure I could probably dig in and see if there's some studies on how many shots, but in general, it is good to vary your training sessions so that it's fine. So say maybe 50% of the session was dealing with fast passes or shots.
Yeah.
I would try and break that up within the session. So maybe you start with your warm up, like you said, you play head ball or a game like that. You warm up your arm, you do some passing drills, but then maybe move to something else before. What I wouldn't want you to do would be stack all the heavy passing and heavy shooting all together at say the end of the session,
Okay.
especially when their arm is a bit tired. It's good to just vary your training, your practice sessions, so that you're changing the load on the body
Yeah.
throughout that session.
And last question about it is, as a young athlete, is there a point where they should really like, sometimes you have soreness or there's pain. Where should an athlete really be where they have to become more cautious of the shoulder? Because, you have these young handball players that just want to be the best, and so they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, it hurts, but I'm just going to keep fighting through. Is there any suggestions you have where someone has to be, smarter about their shoulders?
Yeah, good question too. Um, so in the clinic when I'm rehabbing patients, but also when I'm coaching people, you're allowed to produce pain with your activity. So if it's shooting or passing, I'm
Mm.
okay with manageable levels of shoulder pain within the session.
Yeah.
Um, but what I would want to see is that you recover within 24 to 48 hours so that you should be back to your baseline within that time before you're producing more pain. So, and you want to look at it on like a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. So if you produce some shoulder pain, but then it settles back down, by the next session you produce the same amount of pain, but you still are recovering. That's okay. That's good. That it's not good. It's not bad. It's just what it is. But that will help you adapt to that pain.
Okay.
Um, but if you get to a point where say you produce some shoulder pain, say it's a 3 out of 10. Um, 2 days later it's still a little bit sore, you go to your next training session and it's up to like a 5 out of 10. It settles back down, but maybe still is you're at resting level of like 2 out of 10, and then the next training session you're up even at a 6 out of 10. If it starts to kind of climb like that, then you need to back off, let everything settle back down, and then before I would push more training sessions. So I guess the general rule is it's okay to produce pain as long as it recovers within 24 to 48 hours. And yeah, and there's a difference between, and most of the athletes know a difference between the delayed muscle soreness that you have with just normal exercise versus that kind of sharp, debilitating pain that decreases your function. And that's the other way to look at it too. If you're finding that you're producing a little bit of pain in the shoulder, but your range of motion still stays the same, your shot velocity still stays the same, your quality of movement doesn't change, then those are all good markers. If
Mhm.
you're having that pain that then limits your function, your shoulder feels weaker, you're not moving the normal way you would, you're not hitting as hard as you would, then those are times where you need to modify the load, you need to back off a little bit.
Okay. Um, it's still about shoulders, but a little bit different topic is we've also seen injuries for shoulder injuries from playing defense.
Yeah.
Is that just the strength of the person and then the shoulder is the reason that happens?
Yeah, and same with total over, like, so going back to what we started talking about, the biggest indicator for risk, like the biggest risk factor for shoulder injuries in handball is the amount of training that you're doing. So making sure that as coaches and as athletes, you're preparing yourself for those situations. So before you even get into the gym and doing handball specific stuff, that
Yeah.
you're doing strength sessions in the off season 2 to 3 times a week where you're pushing like heavy weights. So aiming for multi sets, maybe 3 to 4 sets of up to like 6, 7, 8 repetitions, where you're working hard and pushing weight with a bench press, an overhead press, a chest fly. Those are all the core movements when you're playing defense, right? You need to be able to come out and meet the player. You need to control their movement side to side, so like a chest fly.
Yeah.
But then also your lower legs and your core works in that too. So the number one risk factor, like we just said, was that increase in training volume. But then the next one would be, specific weakness, either weakness in your shoulder, weakness in your core, or your legs overall.
Okay. Is there a way that like athletes can see this like this thing you're showing us the
Yeah, for
Norwegian
sure.
test?
So I'll just pull, there's a good, this thing's kind of in my way. Okay, so this is the website I was talking about. These guys do a lot of really good research with handball specific stuff.
Okay.
They're called the Oslo Sports Trauma Research Center. So I'd encourage the coaches to look through this.
Okay.
They deal primarily with research in skiing, soccer, and handball,
Yeah.
and their research is geared mostly towards ACL knee injuries, as well as shoulder injuries. And I'd say those are probably the two most common injuries in handball is traumatic knee injuries and then overuse or repetitive strain shoulder injuries. So, but what I can do for you is I can on just this program right here actually called Hep to Go, I can create just some exercise programs for the shoulder,
Oh,
for ACL or knee injury prevention, and then also those general like strengthening exercises I was talking about in terms of your squat, deadlift, shoulder press, bench press, and definitely we can put that up on the ATHF website.
yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, the other big one, as you were talking about, is ACLs. A lot of studies are coming out about, a lot of drills of, stability with your knee. Um, can you give some feedback on what is important you think for younger athletes, especially young girls in sports or in handball? What is important for them to do to have prevention from ACL injuries?
Yeah, good question. And there's been lots of research done on it. They have the FIFA ACL program that is good, but there's another one here that this study is showing right here, the Norwegian ACL prevention study. They started this like in the early 2000s,
Hmm.
and they've had significant decreases in ACL injuries with elite handballers in Norway. So there's a couple things. You want to have a base of strength. The most important muscle that you're talking about is the quads muscle. So the one on the front of the thigh that controls your knee extension. What happens with non-contact ACL injuries is the ACL. So basically you got your femur, big leg bone on top of the tibia, your bottom leg bone, and your ACL runs from the back of the top one to the front of the bottom one. And that prevents your tibia or your lower leg bone from moving forward. Now, when you are taking usually it happens with a quick pivot or a quick step and a change of direction, a lateral movement, where the force will be too much that you're going one way and trying to then laterally jump or laterally move the opposite direction. And that force overcomes, the knee kind of collapses inward. And then that's where you have the tear on the ACL or the strain on the ACL. So your quads muscle in the knee controls the braking movement of your knee. So say if in a jump, it's going to quickly contract to straighten your knee, but then as you're landing, it's going to eccentrically control the knee as it comes back down. So basically what that means is the muscle is contracted while it's still lengthening. So you need to have very strong quads to control that movement, and especially control that movement over lots of training sessions and over lots of matches. You also need to be strong in your hip because the knee is basically just a hinge. It goes front and back, and then the medial lateral or the sideways control from your knee actually comes from your hip muscles. So building a good base of strength in those muscles, and like I said, I'll whip up that exercise program that targets those areas, but the
Okay.
main ones are your quads, your hamstrings, and then your glute muscles. So the big muscles in your bottom basically, and your glute med, which is one that controls the outward movement of the leg. So having a good base of strength training in those areas is important. And then the other big thing is like the proprioception. So like you were talking about, working on like your knee hip alignment, working on single leg balance exercises, doing lunges, doing some stability work where you're hopping onto just a single leg and controlling that motion, or hopping onto say like a foam block or one of those Bosu balls, the half ones.
Yeah.
It's challenging those subtle changes in movement that the body has to account for quickly in the game sense, because honestly you can't avoid those positions in handball, and they're essential with your first with a strong side move, taking a hard step to your left and then shooting over to the right. Everybody needs to do that, and that's a critical part of the game. So it's not that we're trying to avoid those positions, but we want to train people into those positions to control their hip and knee, try to avoid as much like inward movement of the knee. So when you are in a training session, if you're landing on a single leg, you kind of want to have your hip over top of your knee and your knee is kind of over top of your second toe. Yeah, so we want to try to just expose our athletes to those stresses in a manageable form, and then build up their strength and their robustness to handle that, because it can't be avoided in handball. So
And uh, do you suggest for coaches to do a lot of ACL prevention drills in warm-ups? I don't
it
know
can
if you
be
call it drills, but
Yeah, it can be something that you can,
exercises.
yeah, like the neuromuscular stuff and like the balance stuff. It can be as easy as even in warm-ups, when the athletes are warming up their arms, by just standing on a single leg for 5-10 throws, and then standing on the other opposite leg 5-10 throws.
Mhm.
Um, and for example, when you're doing like the first part of the warm-up, generally where you're just getting your heart rate going and you're running just baseline to center line,
Yeah,
doing a one like doing some just bounding or hopping onto a single leg, getting your balance, getting your alignment, and then exploding off onto the other leg. Yeah, you can incorporate that stuff into the training. A lot of that stuff can be done on the athlete's own time, but that just adds time too, right? And it depends on, you don't want to overload your athletes with a bunch of other exercises outside of the training sessions, because you don't want them to burn out. And
yeah,
so if you can incorporate into it, great. But at the same time, you don't want to be wasting half of your training session on stuff that can be done at home, when you have valuable time of the athletes, the coaches, and the gym space too, right?
yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Um, do you see any other big injuries in handball, like the other, common injuries or ACL, shoulders? What are other common injuries you see from handball?
Yeah. So, like I said, the biggest one that you see is rotator cuff issues,
Yeah,
different pathologies. So it can be tendinopathies. So we used to call them tendonitis, but it's not really it doesn't really demonstrate what the actual issue is. For most people that have like your classic subacromial pain, that point tenderness in through here, um, it's more of a decrease of the strength of the tendon instead of like an inflammatory issue. That's why we call it tendinopathy. Um, and those, a bunch of different factors lead to those, but what it comes down to is the tendon can't tolerate the stress that you're putting on it, with your workplace stresses or your recreational stresses, or in examples specifically handball. So your options are either you need to decrease the total volume of what you're doing for asking that tendon or asking that rotator cuff to do, or you need to build the capacity of your rotator cuff. And usually it's a combination of both. So if an athlete does develop some pain, like we were talking about before, it might be manageable, but it's starting to stick around and become an issue. Generally, what I would do in the clinic for them is I would decrease some of their handball load. I would get them maybe taking a break from shooting drills, still being present in the training session and doing everything else they can,
yeah,
but then adding some specific strength work for that shoulder until we get to the point where they can still play, compete, and function with a manageable level of pain. The other thing too, just a little bit of a tangent, is um, pain doesn't mean that something's damaged. So pain is created by our brain to protect ourselves. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that factor into what a person's pain experience will be. Tissue damage or tissue weakness, that definitely plays a part, but um, stress, fatigue, previous injury, the goals, the athlete's expectations of injury, all of that, all those factors add into how much pain they actually experience. So just because something is painful, I just want people to know, doesn't mean it's damaged. It may mean that the tissue, there is an issue there that we need to protect, but for a lot of people, we just need to adapt some of the things that they're doing, and change some of their training habits, and we can still function. Another thing is, even so, there's a research study that shows 70% of Major League Baseball pitchers have rotator cuff tears, but they can still throw 100-mile-an-hour fastballs, and they can still play at a high level with maybe little to no pain. So just because if say an athlete does have a shoulder issue, if they got a scan, if there is a pathology in there, a rotator cuff, a labral tear, you can still rehab those conservatively without um, surgery or injections or anything scary like that. You can still get that person back up to a high level of competition and a high level of sport. So just want people to know too, and that goes throughout the body. There's a lot of normal changes. There's degenerative changes that happen right after the age of 17, 18 that don't mean that that person's going to be living in pain or that they can't compete at a very high level. But so yeah, that was a little bit of a tangent. So, but the main, like the most common injuries I see would be those rotator cuff pathologies. So rotator cuff tendinopathies, rotator cuff tears, labral tears, or capsular issues. So some athletes may lose range of motion. A lot of times it's that internal range of motion just through repetitive motion or through repetitive stress. And that can, and sometimes that comes from those other things we talked about in terms of not having your mechanics right. If you're asking more of your shoulder when your thoracic mobility or your core strength or your hip and your leg strength is weaker or a deficit, then that can add extra load onto the shoulder. You might be asking it more to do than it needs to do.
Sorry, go on.
And other common injuries, so ACLs or traumatic knee injuries, those would be the main ones. I mean, in any sport, there's always a risk for other areas of injury, and that's athlete specific or athlete dependent. But I'd say those are the main ones. I've seen some normal back pain issues in terms of the upper or lower back, and then other tendon issues, I guess, around the body. So other common areas for tendinopathies or tendon issues to happen would be the front of the knee. So your patellar tendon, right from your kneecap to the front of the shin bone. That one works hard in terms of running, jumping. Same with the Achilles tendon on the back of the heel. Anytime you're jumping, repetitively sprinting, landing, changing direction on a hard surface, you'd be at a higher risk for those issues too. The best prevention for those is to do your work in the off season, to manage your in-season load, to still work on strength training during the season. I still think it's very important to have at least one session a week where you're backing off the handball specific stuff and you're doing strength work and plyometric work. So powerlifting or plyometric specific stuff too.
So you know handball quite well. You know that kids can train anywhere from 2 to 5 times a week here, young athletes. Are you someone that suggests that, instead of maybe doing 5 handball sessions a week, you do 4 and 1 of what you said of other things where, you have no strain on the shoulder, working on ACL prevention, the shoulder exercises. Are you a big believer in that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and that's where you can be more efficient with your training sessions, right? So that, I mean, your options are, you would either work some of that stuff into each training session. So then you're decreasing the amount of handball load because maybe 25% of each 2-hour training session would be focused on that. Or you could decrease the amount of like formal handball sessions, like you said, and have one strength training session where everybody works out together for a 1 or 2 hour period. So the study that I was referencing earlier that talked about the increase of handball load as the main risk for injury, they were basing that on approximately a 5-hour per week handball specific work. So that would be maybe two 2-hour training sessions and then a game. And you can do more than that. That's for sure. That's fine. It's just in that situation to safely increase the amount of handball load, you would want to do an hour additional per week. So if you're training, if your team was training 5 hours a week to safely progress them, I would suggest keeping it between 1 to 2 hours per week extra. So the next week you could do 6 to 7 hours. The following week you could increase 7 to 8 or 7 to 9 hours within reason. But where you get into trouble is if you're going from a 5-hour training week to next week up by more than 3 hours. So if you went from a 5-hour training week to an 8-hour training week, then that's where you start to increase the risk for shoulder injury.
Just a few more questions. I won't keep you too long. I know you're busy.
No,
a big thing that I've been coaching a lot in Europe with some high-level clubs, and something they said that always has interested me, and I've tried to learn more, is our posture they say like a lot of our athletes have poor posture, and they say, doctors there and physios there, when I talk to them and the coaches, they say posture makes a huge difference in shoulder injuries. Is that
Mhm.
is that something that's really important to work with the young athletes?
That's a good question too. And then there's been lots of like myths about posture
Yeah,
in the fitness and the rehab world over the last 40, 50 years. So my thing is that as long as you just don't want to spend a lot of time in one specific posture. So there's no ideal posture, right?
yeah,
We're all different. We're all different genetically. We're all different. We move differently. We hold ourselves differently depending on a whole bunch of different factors, and we generally adapt to those positions over time. So like the classic example is you should have the military posture where you're upright, your shoulders are back,
yeah.
and your chest is out. Okay, but if I sit in this position for 6 hours, that's a problem.
Hmm.
If I sit curved, hunched, slunched over like this position itself isn't an issue. But if I spend 4 or 6 hours in this position, then it becomes an issue. So in terms of how that translates to sport, yes, I sort of agree with them. Thoracic extension, or the ability to basically arch your upper back backwards to have your shoulders back like this, that's important for range of motion, for performance, for generating force with your shoulder.
Hmm.
But if you can access those ranges of motion throughout the training and work, and then you go sit on the bus and you are on your phone and slumped for a little bit, that's fine. But if you have an athlete who can't get into those positions that are required for optimal performance on a sport, in any sport, but handball specifically, yeah, then that's an issue and you need to work on it. But it's more about being able to get into those positions and dynamically move into those positions versus like if you just look at someone and say like, oh, their head's poked forward or their shoulders are rolled. If you see Noah walk into the gym and his shoulders are slouched and his head's down, that's fine as long
Yeah,
as he can get out of those positions once he starts playing. But if he's on the court and he can't get into those positions, then yeah, we need to do some posture work. We need to do some strengthening or some mobility work. But it's athlete specific. It's posture, in my opinion, in general, in rehab and in training, is overblown.
okay. Interesting. The other big one is, as you know, we're quite successful at our younger ages, and uh, we're very successful. Even when we go to Europe, we're pretty successful. Um, the big thing is, and I don't know if you can talk about it, is that younger athletes, when we like try to put them on workout programs and try to talk to them about the importance of, getting stronger, they say, well, we win. I'm successful. I'm
Mhm.
faster than the other players in the other provinces. Can you talk the importance of like the working out, or what you think about that? Because I think that's a big thing that we lack in Alberta, is not our technical skills, not
Yeah,
our ability to, we're fast because we move the ball well, but the strength wise, I think we have a hard time uh, having our athletes do the extra stuff like the working out, because they see it as, well, we win. Why do I have to
yeah,
do the extra things?
yeah, totally. So I mean that comes down to just like reaching your potential as an
Yeah.
athlete, right? So um, continuing to I guess stress the importance to those players is what you need to do. But then if it's so sometimes the barriers to like strength training with athletes can be more time. So if they're feeling maybe a little bit burnt out from all the activity,
Hmm.
maybe taking like the occasional practice off and getting them to do a strength program, it both varies what they're doing, so it keeps them interested, and it's not as big of an ask than if you have, say, four or five training sessions per week. Then if you're asking the athlete to then on their own time go do another 2 to 3 hours, and especially when they're winning, they can say, well, I'm tired, I'm sick of this, I don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
so decreasing the amount of training sessions you're doing as a coach and either doing a fitness class or going to the gym together as a team can be huge too, because that can create accountability with the players. They're all there together. They're all doing it together. That can create like healthy competition. Everybody's done a workout by themselves, and everybody's done a workout with 2 or 3 of their workout partners or buddies. You push yourself harder and you work out better. Well, at least I do too. When you have other eyes on you, or you have your teammates that you're in competition with and practice all the time right there with you.
Okay.
So I think it's massively important. You're just limiting your potential as an athlete and as a club, as a team. But then also there's all those other secondary benefits of strength training. So decreased risk for injury. You have more energy, less fatigue. There's a wealth of healthy benefits from strength training, regardless.
And the difference is, some young girls are like, I don't want to lift weights. I don't like to lift weights. Can they substitute with resistance training, or you think lifting weights is very important?
You can use a whole bunch of different things as resistance. You can use water as resistance in the pool. You can use resistance bands. You can use cable machines. You can use free weights. Like, it's not about the type of modality that you're using, but about the effort that it takes. So a lot of times, you want to be working within 75%, 85, 80% of your one rep max. So sometimes if you're just doing repetitive stuff with a rubber band for your shoulder, but you're never fatiguing it, or say you're doing body weight squats or using light resistance tube to do those squats, or do some upper body exercises, but you're not overly fatiguing, or you're not taxing the muscle, then you're kind of wasting your time. You're not going to get the same kind of benefits that you would when you're working out to, like, say, a 6 or 7 rep maximum, where after 6, 7, 8 repetitions of that exercise, you feel like you can't do another one. That's the sweet spot. That's where the adaptation happens, and you're more efficient with your workout. So sometimes, and some athletes may say, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to bulk up, and they don't want to bulk up because it might slow them down on the court, that it might for whatever reason. You can, when you're looking at hypertrophy or muscle growth, that comes from high volume of repetitions and sets. So somebody who's trying to put on muscle mass will do 4 to 6 or 7 sets of like 8 to 12, 15 repetitions, where they're just going and going and going. You're not going to get massive hypertrophy or massive increases in the size of your muscles by doing 3 or 4 sets where you're lifting maybe only 6, 7, 8 repetitions. There's crossover between sets and reps on your gains. You're going to get a little bit bigger. Maybe you're going to get definitely stronger. You're going to have more endurance, but unless you're really loading up an area multiple times a week and your training volume is huge, you're not going to have massive spikes in your muscle growth. What you will do, though, is you'll get more efficient. Your motor units and your muscle basically get more efficient at working. So you'll get massive strength gains from lifting heavier weights, not because of the size of your muscle growing bigger, but more because you're just more efficient neuromuscularly at controlling those movements. So it's huge, super important.
And with the biomechanics of a handball player, there's 2 ways. There's a lot of, heavy weights, low reps, explosiveness, power in the workout, or the lighter weights, more reps for more muscle endurance.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one that is better than the other for a handball player?
I think it's good to vary your training. So, but if honestly, if there was only one thing I could do, it would be power work. So it would be higher weights or faster movements, lower reps and lower sets, versus because if you're working on endurance, you're going to get a lot of that in their normal training sessions, right? Like doing a drill where you're passing, running, throwing, and repeating that's going to build endurance of all those muscles that you're working. But in a handball training session, you don't really have the opportunity to be moving weight fast, quickly. I mean, you do when you're jumping, when you're shooting, that's still power work, but to actually get improvements in that, you need to add some weight to it. You need to add some resistance to those movements. So there was only one thing I could do in season. It would be still power work.
Interesting. Well, the last thing would be, now if someone has an injury and is looking to come see you, how would they get a hold of you if they have questions about ACL? Tell us a little bit about how to contact you if they're
Sure.
looking for rehab or anything.
Yeah, I'm happy to help anybody in the handball community for sure. You can reach me. My clinic is called Innovation Physical Therapy Nemeo, so I'm on the north side. I treat patients in the clinic from Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. till 1 p.m.
Okay.
But if you want to reach out and ask me questions, just general about physio, about handball specific stuff, about rehab, you can get at me on Twitter. I'll give you my information too, Mike. You can kind of
Yeah.
maybe just post it in the
For sure.
description. So Twitter, Facebook, our website's innovationphysio.com, and yeah, I think that's the best way to get a hold of me. I'll put my work email. I'll give you my work email too. That's probably the best too.
And are you guys just with rehab, or can they come, like, what else do you guys offer? Is that it?
Yeah, so we have massage, but basically we're an outpatient physio clinic. So
Okay.
I'm doing sessions, one-on-one sessions with a whole bunch of different patients in the clinic. So we have some equipment here. We'll do basically what my treatments look like, or what my sessions look like, is getting a good idea of what the condition is, and then trying to match the patient or the athlete's goals with individualized care, and with a lot of active solutions. So a lot of it is exercise based and movement based. We do some other different modalities in terms of spinal manipulations or dry needling, IMS, things like that, to help with pain and to help with symptoms. But the most important thing I do is basically educate the individual to try and navigate their own kind of sea of injury or whatever they're dealing with. So
Okay. Well, that's fantastic.
yeah.
Have you worked with any handball players?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've had definitely some Alberta handball players come see me in the clinic here at Innovation, and then also just in working with the men's team a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
treating athletes in the gym or in the hallways behind behind the gym, wherever. So yeah, I love handball, love rehab, and yeah, I love working with athletes. So I'd be
And if
happy to help anybody.
people don't know the team that Brian worked with, the senior men, they were on his table more than they were actually practicing. Some of them, they took
Yeah.
advantage of you.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I'm not there. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No,
I'll
it's
be
just
back.
funny. It's like I just remember you were there once a week, I believe, and when you weren't, they all practiced. As soon as you got here, my hamstring hurts,
Yeah,
my shoulder
everybody's pulling up
hurts.
lame. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's pulling up lame to the physio table. No, I'd love to be back, and I hope to be back doing some more work with the provincial teams. I got a new kid at home, so, and with
Yeah.
COVID, life's a little bit different right now, but
Exactly.
everybody will see me around the gym too, and once the league fires up, I'll be playing again. So
Nice.
don't be shy. If any of your athletes or anybody in the community, just come up and chat me up. I may look a little bit scary, but I look maybe scarier on the court, but I'm easy to chat off the court. So
No, yeah. Well, thank you very much, and please send me all your information so that people can contact you. And I mean, this has been great. I think right now, coming back from COVID, it's important that we don't just throw all our athletes back on the court and have 200 shots first practice. Is we take
exactly.
step by step to get them back going and no injuries.
Yeah, the biggest take home message is you just want to try to grade that exposure to those stresses. So just like
Yeah.
you said, varying the training sessions and just slowly building up that capacity, and that's the best thing you can do. I mean, injuries are going to happen, or it's part of the sport, it's part of
Yeah.
life, but as much as we can do to try and manage them, it's great. The other thing too, Mike, I'll outline those exercise programs.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll do one for off-season, preseason, like strength and power work, which I
Okay.
still think is important to do maybe once a week in season, but more
Yeah.
so out of season. And then I'll outline that shoulder mobility one we talked about earlier in the podcast here, and then also the ACL stuff. So where you're working the balance work or the single leg stuff. So we'll try and make 3 different programs, and then hopefully the athletes and coaches can use them as they see. If anybody has questions on how to implement those, then just get at me with all that different ways to contact me.
Well, thank you so much. Hopefully our family life is going well, and it was great talking to you, and hopefully we'll see you at our practices and then at the gym.
Yeah, we'll see everybody soon. Take
Thank
care,
you,
Mike. Thanks a
Brian.
lot for
Take
having me,
care.
man.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.